Oh.
But yeah, so we were like, it's not.
Give me a quick second. No, this way. This one.
Yeah, these are right. There's a light there. Yeah, since you can't do that.
All right. So, for those who are in our audience who cannot see me, my name is Alexis Dickerson, and I will be your faceless presenter, your MC for today. I want to thank you all for coming to the first MA and MFA end of semester screenings and presentations. Again, thank you so much if you are joining us from online. Thank you to everyone who has shown up, which obviously our virtual audience cannot see. But just imagine you see all of our smiling eyes because we are all wearing masks and we are all social distancing because we follow the rules. So how things are going to run today is we are going to have 3 presenters. We have Tristan Turner, Tanner Benson, and Bobby Karmi from MA. And then we will be doing a 10-minute Q&A session after each presenter. And then we will have a 1-hour-long screening from MA and MFA students. At the very end of that screening, we will be taking Q&A, and our filmmakers that are here have agreed to do that. So shout out to them. For those who are watching us from home, you can post comments on YouTube. We'll be keeping track of that. So during the Q&A sessions, or if you have questions during the presentations or the screenings, just pop your question in the chat, and I will be moderating those online questions, and I'll be able to ask our presenters and our filmmakers. So to get things started, we're going to have our first presenter, Tanner Benson. Tanner, if you want to make your way.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tanner Benson, and today I'm going to talk about character engagement in Chantal Akerman's 1975 film, Jean Dielman. Most scholars focus on the incredibly suspenseful second half of this film, and they characterize the first half as monotonous and boring. However, I hope to illustrate why those characterizations are reductive and why they do not fully account for the film's complex mode of spectator-character relations. This film aligns us with Jean through her routine. Her obsession with the aesthetic dimension of her housework dominates the way she engages with her world. While the film never lets us into Jean's emotional state, it draws us in through its interested gaze, which frames every movement of every chore as significant. For Jean, each task is vitally important. Her graceful performance of domestic labor, framed by a distanced observational camera, brings the spectator into an intimate understanding of the importance of the minutiae of her everyday life. Next slide, please. Just a quick plot summary for those who haven't seen the film. It runs just under 3.5 hours. It shows us 3 days in the life of Jean, a woman who spends her days taking care of her teenage son, doing chores around her apartment, and running errands. Every afternoon, she takes in a client with whom she has sex for money. On the second day, something happens off-screen with one of her clients. From that moment on, Jean's precision becomes erratic. She overcooks her potatoes, which sends the rest of her routine into a tailspin. On the third day, we watch her struggle to deal with the severity of her mental fog, and the film ends by showing us Jean and her third client in bed. She has an orgasm, after which she stabs her client in the neck with a pair of scissors. The last shot shows Jean sitting at the table in the dark and lasts for just under 7 minutes. Next slide, please. When we look at how a film is structured, we usually segment it into various pieces. We break it up into parts that reveal insights about how the events in the film are organized. Jean Dielman is by no means a normal narrative film. However, like many mainstream movies, most critics tend to divide Jean Dielman into 3 acts: day 1, day 2, and day 3. However, if we look at our engagement with Jean as a character, it may be more helpful to look at it in terms of 2 phases. Next slide, please. In the first half of the film, we learn to see the world as Jean does, as a series of rigidly organized chores. The camera, like Jean, is extremely meticulous. It shows her work in great detail, but it doesn't get too close. We always observe her from a distance, and we're never allowed access into her mental state or her emotional responses. We become observers, quasi-anthropological surveyors, watching Jean interact with her environment. This distance provokes our curiosity, and Jean's emotional ambiguity draws us in further, as if her behavior will give us insight into her mind. In the second part of the film, which begins after she sees her second client, her routine becomes unstable. Her worldview begins to rupture, or as one scholar put it, faulty timing replaces boredom with anxiety, efficiency with clumsiness. For me, one of the best little details that illustrates the break in John's behavior is this brief moment when she buttons her coat, her bathrobe. When we see her morning routine on day 3, she accidentally skips a button. For this presentation, I will be focusing on the immense complexities of the first phase of our engagement. Now, many scholars write that nothing happens during this first part of the film. Indeed, there is a palpable lack of narrative drive. And when we watch John move from one task to the next, performing each with precise meticulousness, many viewers claim that this monotonous routine serves just to set up the suspense in the second half. Some scholars call it boring. One writer compared this kind of movie to cultural vegetables, saying that it's good for you to watch, but it's certainly not as appealing as a slice of chocolate cake. However, to describe this portion of the film as boring drastically undermines its rich aesthetic complexity. Next slide, please. John's life is dominated by precision. Every detail has its place. In the opening shot, seen here, we watch John put the potatoes on to boil just as her first client arrives. There is a fluidity with which she retrieves and replaces the matches from behind the stove. We pick up on her almost mechanical demeanor throughout the scene. Aesthetic philosopher Kelvin Malchione asserts that sustained domestic practice gives way to our ability to use household objects, quote, as a matter of unconscious habit, unquote, which involves using them and returning them to their proper place. Such tidiness exposes how our habits become perfectly adjusted to the home's composition. The opening scene of Jeanne Dielman allows us to watch her move about the kitchen in precisely this way. Through these ordinary actions, the film conveys John's intimate familiarity with her environment as she moves gracefully, choreographed through routine and aesthetically motivated habits. Next slide, please. Generally, when we think of aesthetic experiences, we think about our responses to art. But there are other parts of our lives that we can characterize as aesthetic. Nature scenes are perhaps the most common source of aesthetic experience outside of art. For example, when we appreciate a sunset or look at a beautiful flower. This extension of aesthetic experience is known as natural aesthetics, natural coming from the fact that we derive aesthetic pleasure from nature. More recently, philosophers have expanded the definition of aesthetics even further, noting how we make decisions every single day that are based on minute aesthetic experiences. Yuriko Saito was one of the first people to explore the aesthetics of every day, and she writes, an aesthetic reaction can also be a seemingly insignificant and sometimes almost automatic response we form in our everyday life. It can be our response to everyday phenomena such as mess and dirt. These responses prompt us towards actions such as cleaning, discarding, purchasing, and so on. When our kitchen is dirty, we choose to clean it to make it look more appealing. When we pick out produce in the grocery store, we look for the apple that shines the best, or that's just the right firmness, or that looks the juiciest. Our experience of Jeanne Dielman as a film is not an everyday experience in this sense. However, an understanding of everyday aesthetics can help us comprehend how nearly every facet of John's life is motivated by everyday aesthetic experiences. Next slide, please. Aside from the choices we make that are based on minute aesthetic experiences, our everyday actions can be a sort of performance. Jeanne's grace manifests itself not just in the way she performs her tasks, but also in the way she's crafted her routine, squeezing in every ounce of efficiency into her day. We marvel at her momentum and her stamina. Now, every morning when I cook my eggs, I like to sweep the floor in my small apartment. I live in a small studio, so sweeping the whole floor doesn't take very long, but I always try to time it just right so that by the time I'm done sweeping, my eggs are ready to eat. Now, I'm not nearly as graceful as John. I look more like this. Next slide, please. This just goes to show that not all domestic labor is done gracefully. Next slide, please. Now, what I think is so special about this film is the way that it depicts grace. John clearly performs her work with a certain level of grace, but the film's formal properties also perform their job gracefully. As John moves in and out of the frame, the camera never moves or cuts to track her, but we never feel as though it prevents us from seeing her actions. It remains calm, poised, and expectant. It operates as a poetic link through which we engage with Jeanne and her experience of the world. The mechanical consistency, which the film maintains throughout, echoes the graceful productivity of its protagonist. Just as Jeanne moves about the kitchen as though she's done it 1,000 times before, the camera's calm observance seems to have watched her do it all those times. Now we're going to watch a brief clip of her setting the table, and I want you to look for a few things. Notice what the camera does. As Jean leaves the room, it never follows her. And also notice how gracefully she places everything on the table and how it has an exact place where it needs to be. Next slide, please. So we start in a dark room with a blank canvas, so to speak. She comes in and sets her tools down before turning on the light, rather than bumbling about for the light switch with her hands full. Notice the way she unfolds the tablecloth. The neat squares form perfectly aligned creases. This also indicates that she took an equal amount of care in storing the tablecloth yesterday after dinner. And now notice how she knows exactly where everything goes, but not just so that they can eat dinner. For Jean, it seems that a nicely set table is an art form. She values setting the table in an aesthetically pleasing manner. So she leaves the room, but there's no cut. Oh, but there was a freeze.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. So it's important to remember that as viewers, we don't have an everyday aesthetic experience since we are engaged with a work of art, but we do get pleasure from the depiction of Jean's organized home and her precisely calculated routine. And we also take satisfaction in knowing what to expect. We may not have access to Jean's emotional state, but we know that she engages with her world through a series of chores which will always be done gracefully. Next slide. So Jean's aesthetically crafted performance of tasks stems from habitual mode of living. On the first evening, here on the left, Jean and her son Sylvain set up the pull-out couch in the living room, which doubles as Sylvain's bedroom. They move the coffee table and armchairs against the wall in a series of smooth movements, choreographed through daily and habitual repetition. On the morning of day 2, Jean folds her son's pajamas, makes his bed, and folds the pull-out bed back into its couch form. She folds his pajamas neatly, like the tablecloth, before placing them under his pillow, an aesthetically motivated choice to avoid wrinkling the nightwear. Again, we perceive the extent to which Jean's actions are aesthetically motivated. After Jean folds Sylvain's pajamas, she exits off-screen left. By this point in the film, we intimately know the layout of her apartment, and we know that she did not exit the room, though she left the frame. Before cutting, the film lingers on the room for a few moments, allowing us to contemplate its incompleteness. In this temporary disorder, we don't assume that Jean intends to leave the room in disarray. Though the scene does not show the full restoration of the furniture, we assume that Jean continues to rearrange the room back into its functional, orderly, and comfortable configuration, an aesthetically oriented arrangement. We feel safe in assuming that Jean will restore order to her living room because the film has successfully aligned us with her. We may not have emotional insight, but we are deeply familiar with her behavior and her motivation. John Gilman's formal and narrative design engaged the spectator with the character through the development of a shared worldview. John's engagement with her own world rests on an aesthetically oriented performance of tasks. As spectators, we receive aesthetic pleasure from John's immaculate orderness. Not only are the images composed like richly complex paintings, but John's entire routine is like a puzzle. Each task has its place, and as the day goes on, we become increasingly impressed by the momentum and grace with which she moves through them. We find ourselves captivated, drawn into the trance that the film has established. We realize the depth of labor involved in keeping even a small household running smoothly. Because it appears effortless, many scholars jump to the conclusion that the first portion of the film is minimalist, simple, and boring. However, there is a deep-seated complexity running throughout, and the precision with which the film tracks John's behavior is utterly mesmerizing. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Tanner. You did amazing. Right before we hop into the Q&A, Tanner told me that there's something that he's pulling over the summer. Do you want to give a little info about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, so Jean Gilman is one of the pioneer films in a more modern stylistic phenomenon called slow cinema, and this summer I'm putting on a series of screenings of some of my favorite slow films and some that I've never seen, so that I have an excuse to watch them on a big screen and with people that care about them. So if you're interested in seeing how slow cinema works, feel free to come to all or any one of these. And we're going to culminate with Satan Tango, which is 7 hours and really hard to watch on your own, so I advise coming to this. Are we doing a question then?
Yep. All right.
Any
So-
questions? Yeah, Anya?
So, which of these traits that you discussed in Jean Diamant today do you find are kind of ubiquitous throughout slow cinema, kind of traits of slow cinema in general, and what's like specifically unique to Jean Diamant in that movement?
Yeah, should I repeat those? Okay. Yeah, so Anya wants to know what traits in Jean Dielman are ubiquitous around slow cinema and which ones are unique to the film. I think in a lot of slow cinema there's an emphasis on repetition and on behavior. This sort of emotional ambiguity of characters is pretty ubiquitous throughout. It allows the spectators to sort of fill in those gaps and sort of wonder about what they might be feeling by putting our own emotion in. With Jean Diamant, I think the emphasis on housework is unique. Though a lot of slow films concentrate around labor and like daily labor, this one focuses on like cooking and cleaning in ways that others haven't. Yeah, Bobby?
How does this particular film compare to the rest of Chantal Ackerman's filmography? Is this more accessible, less accessible? And alongside that, how does her style evolve from this point going forward? Does she get slower? Does she get faster? How does this work fall into the catalog of her larger body of work? I guess is my question.
Yeah, so within Chantal Ackerman's body of work, Jean Dielman, it's not her first feature film, but she made it when she was 25 years old, and I'm 25 right now, and to me it's astonishing that somebody could make something like this. Her films before this, she has one called Hotel Monterey, which is just a series of still lifes of a hotel, the hallway, the bedroom, people wander in and out. So it's sort of got this durational, minimalist quality to it. In the rest of her career, she does a lot more like documentary work. She still keeps with this same like slow rhythm and minimalist action. But she made one film, a documentary about her mother, to whom she also said Jean Dielman was a love letter to her mother. So she's got this fascination with the women in her life and sort of the women that surround her. So thematically, it's pretty consistent. She also admitted that she doesn't think she ever made anything as good as Jean Dielman afterward. Meg?
I have a question. Didn't it say there were 3 days that this went out, this film? What happens on day 3?
Yeah, so in day 3, this is why I think the film is best segmented into halves, because day 3 is sort of a continuation of the afternoon of day 2, where we just sort of watch her continue with her mental fog, and we see the extent to which her routine is frustrated. So things that happen in the morning all of a sudden become frustrated. It sort of just completes the cycle.
Okay. Is there a lot of like redundancy, like the bedroom when you showed it twice, one on day 1, one on day 2? And then is there one on day 3 that's kind of that same setup that shows like a different shape? Because there was like it was kind of like Where's Waldo. It's like, oh, the bed is neatly made in the mirror, but then in day 2 it's all messy. So it's like these little details. So do they show that on day 3? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for instance, on the morning of day 2, before her routine gets ruptured, we see her shine her son's shoes. And she does it really cleanly and meticulously and purposefully. But then on day 3, in the morning, she's shining the shoes and she drops the brush. So it's something as subtle as that. And there is a little bit of redundancy, but every time an action is presented twice, there's always some difference in it. Yeah. Oh, last question, if anyone else has one. Yeah, Evan?
So when you talk about slow cinema, particularly like what it is that you really gravitate towards about it, what is your strategy for like embedding yourself within something that is really, really expansive and kind of quiet, and in which it would be like easy to find yourself distracted? So you know, like over the course of these really extensive running times, how do you situate yourself like within what's going on in order to process things like in a really analytical kind of fashion?
Yeah, so when I'm watching, I try to treat it like almost a meditation. Like, I don't try to be too hard on myself, like, oh, I have to pay attention to everything that happens. But rather it becomes more of like an activity of tracking where my thoughts go. So like I try to pay attention to the questions I ask myself. Like, why is she doing this? Or how does she feel about this? And then just sort of like earmarking those to come back to. And I really like slow cinema because like my mind constantly wanders. And in slow cinema, I feel like the plot is a lot more patient with me than in like action movies where I have to be paying attention to every scene. But in slow cinema, like you don't really have that kind of pressure. So your mind can wander, and that's sort of part of the experience, is just being in this atmospheric zone. A lot of slow films tend to be, like, I like to think of them like watching an aquarium or watching like a really compelling screensaver on a computer. Like, you know, that sort of hypnotic trance that you can get into. It's very similar to that.
Thank you so much, Tanner. All right, so our next presenter is going to be Bobby Karmi. Make your way down.
I don't think I need a microphone, do I? Oh, okay. I forget that we're also live streaming this, so people can't necessarily hear my big booming voice unless I have the mic right here. So here we go. So I do not have a visual presentation, however, because I wanted to maintain sort of the oral presentation I had for these submissions I had over the semester. One of the things that I, as a cis white man, have to sort of recognize is how much film academia and film history sort of favors my perspective. Even as an autistic man and even as a queer man, it still favors my perspective. And so one of the things I tried to do is that I tried to, sorry, I ran up here. I got a little too excited. But one of the things I try to do is to be conscientious about finding and exploring different perspectives that make up the larger whole of cinematic humanity. And as such, one of the sort of subcategories I find particularly interesting to explore and find especially exciting to explore is First Nation cinema, arguably the most marginalized cinema in the world. We tend to, in film academia and in general popular film discourse, talk more so about representation of First Nations individuals and indigenous populations over filmmakers from these communities. For example, there is no indigenous Steven Spielberg. Or even on the farthest end, there is no indigenous Jibril Diop Mbate. And so that isn't to say that there aren't prominent filmmakers who are emerging from these communities. You have directors like Chris Ayer or Zacharias Canuck, or even more recent genre artists like Jeff Barnaby. And that their existence is worthy of celebration. To paraphrase Amanda J. Cobbs, any filmmaker who emerges from these highly marginalized indigenous communities is worthy of celebration just for the fact of their existence. With that in mind, another aspect that further is worthy of study among these very insular cinematic community is also women authors in these cinematic communities. Because if indigenous populations are the most cinematically marginalized, then then even further marginalized must be women authors along these lines. So over this past academic year, I wrote 2 papers about 2 recent indigenous films authored by women. The first was Edge of the Knife, written
and directed by Helen Hake Brown with help from Gowan Edshaw, and The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open by El-Majid Tailfeathers and Kathleen Hepburn. Both films, utilizing very interesting cinematic techniques, tell drastically different stories alongside these perspectives. Edge of the Knife is a similar kind of horror story than what we've been seeing recently in this decade, with an emphasis on supernatural metaphors for trauma, for familial dynamics, for the mixing of the mundane and the fantastical. And When the Body Remembers When the World Broke Open is about domestic violence, about the legacy of settler colonial violence against indigenous women. Both are pretty heavy viewing. I would not recommend them on a light, sunny Sunday. But for the day we're having right now in Wilmington, which is kind of overcasty, rainy, and kind of dour, I think they would be prime viewing material. Edge of the Knife, which I'm going to talk about first, is a film I've written about for the website Horror Origins, and a lot of the text I wrote about was from that review for the class submission. And as such, it was something I got really excited to because I got to show it to my fellow MA students. And it was not the most challenging film that we showed. It was, especially when compared to On the Silver Globe by Zawalski, which we also watched for that class. But it was a very interesting film because, because of the mix of the fantastical and the mundane. A good portion of the film is dedicated to just capturing the everyday rituals and activities of the Haida people, in part because the film was initially conceived as a means of preserving the Haida language for future generations. And when viewed through that lens, the framing device of a mask burning becomes symbolic of the loss of culture and the loss of language that often occupies the thoughts of a lot of First Nations folks in Canada. It should also be noted that Edge of the Knife is also interested in maintaining one of the Haida-specific myths of a madman driven to possession through grief, who must be exorcised by his loved ones. When the body remembers when the world broke open is much more dour and much more recent. It's a film about a woman who is indigenous but is white passing, trying to help another woman escape her domestic abusive relationship. It's based upon the director's own attempts to save, for lack of a better word, save another indigenous woman. And it's ultimately an incredibly frustrating film because you see the nuances behind both women. It's a deeply empathetic film, but you're frustrated because, well, you just want to help both of them. The Body Remembers is a very well-constructed film, especially formally, where it has a lot of hidden long takes, similar to that of Birdman, in that it fakes a long take and it fakes an idea of like cinematic, like real-time events, sort of going for something similar to Tanner's slow cinema, but it's a little more quickly paced, it's a little more dramatically driven, and both films ultimately represent sort of these subject matters of what happens when we let Indigenous filmmakers have the opportunity to make their own films, especially along the lines of gender. Helen Hake Brown and El-Majid Tailfeathers are both continuing to work within not just more dramatically inclined work, but also within genre work. Tailfeathers is specifically going to be starring in a film that is analogizing the abduction of Indigenous children through the basically the domestic school system within Canada. And Helen Hake Brown has her short film about a man discovering another worldly plane on Mubi currently. And both films are really exciting and really worthwhile for our further academic investigation. Indigenous cinema continues to be something of an unexplored topic within a larger framework of academic studies, cinematic studies, and even popular cinematic studies. And it is in my humble opinion that if we are to move forward, if we are to continue to talk about the idea of representation matters and incorporating intersectional thought when it comes to cinematic studies, we must be willing to engage with contemporary Indigenous cinema. Thank you.
All right, time for questions.
Yeah, Anya.
So I'm curious, you kind of set up your presentation by saying that because women filmmakers are marginalized in non-Indigenous cinema, that they're likely to be the most marginalized group within Indigenous cinema. And I would kind of question that assumption because, especially since some of the Indigenous groups that you're looking at are matriarchal, like the Haida group, does that necessarily suggest that gender inequality exists there in the same way in terms of filmmaking? Like, could Indigenous cinema be so marginalized that the same gender inequalities aren't present?
That's an interesting question and one that's worth exploration, particularly because one of the things that I found was that the overwhelming majority of Indigenous filmmakers who were women tended to work in documentary films. And part of my own bias is favoring studies of narrative cinema, where that sort of bias exists within, particularly also in regards to when I can never say the title right. The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open. I hope that helps answer the question. Or anyone else? Tanner.
Are there like regionally specific qualities to these films? Like the Haida group is from the Pacific Northwest, and I'm not sure where The Body Remembers is from. But is there sort of like a pan-Indigenous style that we could say, or are they sort of unique to their own culture and region?
I would say that they are culturally specific. Like, for example, Edge of the Knife does not look like a Zacharias Canuck film, particularly because the Haida and the Inuit have different sensibilities when it comes to storytelling. Like, Zacharias Canuck has this very patient, all these very long takes, these very patient takes. One might even make a pun and say glacial. And whereas Edge of the Knife is very much more like Islander. I remember that Alexis, who is our wonderful sort of MC, mentioned that the film reminded them of their own cultural background in that way. Does anyone else have another question? Oh, Anya?
Kind of bring up an interesting point. So when we discuss Indigenous cinema, how do we navigate the dangers of essentializing them as group? And should we talk about each kind of tribe's different cinemas as though we would national cinema?
I think that would be an appropriate response, which is to sort of like talk about like what issues face particular tribes, what aesthetics, what sensibilities, and that invites a sort of, I think it's ethnographic. Yeah, the term is ethnographic quality to the analysis of these films. It's one of the things that I kept in mind, particularly, I almost wrote about Jeff Barnaby this past year, and Jeff Barnaby's recent genre films that specifically deal with the Makapi people, specifically like how they face issues particular to the boarding school system that has been effectively utilized to perform cultural genocide. And that's an issue that's not necessarily faced by, say, Zacharias Canuck and his work, which is primarily about Inuit cultures and their sensibilities. He only, to my knowledge, has one film where an explicit part of it is dealing with would-be colonizers, and it's his most recent film. Anyone else? All right, if that's it, then I think I'm good.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bobby. All right, so for presenting, we have our final, but certainly not the least, our own Tristan. Here you go. Mike, don't forget the mic.
What's up, guys? How are you? All right, so I don't have like an academic presentation. I'm actually just presenting on a film that I've been working on since before I started the program, and I never knew that it would become like the essential project of my time, but it has. It's called Inside World, and the film's title is inspired by a track by One Tricks Point Never. It's an artist I really like. And one day I was listening to the song, and I constantly making visuals in my head of what songs kind of like look like inside. And so I got the idea of making a film based on that song. Next. So the origin of the film and how I started working on it have transformed vastly. So I became interested in video art, and I had been collecting, televisions and a whole bunch of video equipment. I would figure out how to break cameras. I would cut wires, and do all the things I could do without buying like a $1,000 mixer to do video art. And so I started in early 2020, and it was just a film for a class assignment, which is the capstone of my undergrad. And there wasn't really an intention behind the film other than just make video art visualizations. I kind of wanted to have an aggressive tone, but I didn't really have any concrete intention. I just kind of wanted to experiment. Next.
Tristan, don't forget a flash warning.
Okay. Oh yeah, and these videos have flashes, so I'm supposed to warn you guys that if anyone has like epilepsy issues, just like raise your hand, let me know. Is everyone good? All right, cool. So this is some of the early footage of Inside World. This is just like an example of some of the video art I was creating. I was doing like a lot of found footage. I was doing generational trauma to VHS tapes that I would find. I was in a weird situation where, I don't know if any of you know August Schaller, who graduated from the undergrad in film studies. He's a big Craigslist creature, and so we would go together to creepy old men's houses and buy boxes of VHS tapes, and I would use that as a lot of my source material. Next. So eventually, I kind of stagnated with the project, and as you all know, I'm very into experimental cinema, and I have a few favorites, and I was playing around with the idea of transferring the video art into like a black and white 16mm film format. And so around that time, I was becoming interested in Aldo Tambolini, who does just that. This still is from a film called Black TV, and it's video footage that has been recorded off of his television screen, and it's kind of a film about the trauma of losing a Kennedy in an assassination. And then the next film that really inspires me is a film by Paul Scherer's Touching. That was one of the initial inspirations even behind the video art portion. Touching is one of those films that if you see it, you'll never forget how it affected you. It's a threatening film, and I really wanted to kind of emulate some of that. Another film that I was inspired by was one of my old films that I was not very happy with. It was just a self-portrait that's still here. And this film, I would get found footage, and I would just glitch the footage through data moshing and other means. And I wanted to practice that because I was really interested in digital distortion for a while, but I kind of stopped exploring it, so I kind of felt the need to go back and try more. And the last film is Free Radicals by Lin Lai. And so I completely re-engaged with the film in a new way. I gave it an intention, and so the intention behind the film was I want to mix video distortion, film distortion, and digital distortion all into one and see what happens. Next. So the first thing I did was I transferred the video to film, and so you can see the differences here side by side. And I intentionally used black and white film, 60mm reversal, and in the right you can see some glitches that I've added, just some early glitches. So this is like a very early test on the right side, and the left side, what you're looking at, is what the base of the film was shot on the 16mm film. Next. And so then I began the distortion process on the film, which is the most time-consuming part of the project. So I was very broke. The pandemic happened. Film equipment, film editing equipment costs a lot of money, and so I had to get crafty. I got some ramen to go, and then I cleaned out the container, and I got an LED light box that you would maybe stick inside of your closet. And I put it inside the container. I hot glued the container to a cardboard, and I would roll the film reel across it, and I would sit there with the needle. And these frames on 16mm are about the size of a pinky fingernail. And I just wanted to animate kind of with no plan, just to see how I was feeling every single day. I didn't want to structure it in a specific way, but I wanted to animate whatever visuals I could see on the small frames. I just kind of wanted to do something random that would complement it. And there are a few albums I would always listen to, like people like Nicholas Jar or A Blue Ghost, that I would listen to on repeat while editing these. And eventually, Carlos Case lent me a movie scope viewer, which is a great help because every time I would animate one of these, which would take hours, I would have to project it. And with this, I can just use a hand cranked reel, and I can see what the animation looks like. I can make it 24 frames a second, or I can go very slowly, go frame by frame. Next. So, in order to complete my film, I wanted to learn how to paint on film, and it's something I had always been interested in, but hadn't really practiced. So I didn't want to mess up Inside World because it was very important to me. And so I took a break from it, and I created this film called Painted Film. And this is some footage from Painted Film. And I learned how to paint on the film, and I just wanted to show you guys that so I can juxtapose it with the next. So this is some footage from Inside World now, very raw, but this is what some of the painting looks like on the film. This is a very small clip. And so I had to take probably like 3 months off of the film so I could learn how to paint. And now I paint every day. Next. And every once in a while, I'll go to the film and I'll have, if I complete, maybe 30 more seconds of animation, I'll project it, and then I'll do a lo-fi transfer on my phone from the wall, and I'll run it through the digital distortion part to see maybe, what it might look like after it's finished. Next. So this is one of those examples. This would be the closest thing I would have to indicate to anyone about what the film might end up looking like in the future. And as you can see the video distortion, you can see all the dots of paint, and those dots were really hard for me to achieve. I wanted them to look like cells. I was thinking about like coronavirus and Inside World. I kind of wanted this film to be kind of have an organic sensation when engaging with it. Next. And so now, this is the future. It's going to take me a few more months to do the rest of the direct-to-film animation. So it's 24 frames per second. I work on it as consistently as I can, but obviously, during finals week, it's hard, stuff like that, taking trips. So I plan to have it finished by the end of the year, hopefully. I have about 35% of the film to complete. While I'm doing this all the while, I have to theorize the editing style I want to incorporate into the film. So I need to figure out, what do I want the frame rate to be? How long do I need the film to be? Do I want to glitch the final film and then export it? Or do I want to export the final film and then glitch it? That would just, kind of change the visuals a little bit. And I want to do some audio experimentation. I'm thinking about utilizing the aesthetics of audio video feedback. I want to convert the final film into raw data and into MP3 and place that low in the mix. And I also want to sample the projector and make it soundscape. And then I just have questions about film festivals and to figure out what film festivals would appreciate this work. And I want to do a little bit of mixed media expansion. There are frames that I really like from the film that you would only see for a fraction of a second, maybe, in the final version. I'm thinking about getting parts of the film scanned and made into, visual art. And that's all. Thank you, guys.
All right, question time.
Matthias?
Yeah, so I really love the process that you're moving from different mediums. What is the final medium form you want to take? Are you planning to make a 16mm print for festivals? Or are you planning to keep it just digital?
Oh, it'll just be digital.
Okay.
Evan?
One of the things that is really always fascinating to me is kind of like the psychic record, what structural film is capable of. A little bit on what it is about the process of working, in a very medium-specific way, like a structural way, that is kind of like the gateway into exploring like the psychic function of how you experience music and how you're going to incorporate like the actual elements of the film, like reverted back into kind of like an experimental musical form, like you're going to use as the soundtrack.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned structural film because that's, the structural film is something I was inspired by, and now I've kind of completely abandoned that. Like I said, when I animate, I don't have any kind of plan when I go into it. And the glitch work is entirely unpredictable. So I kind of want it to be this kind of weird media organic form, like life form, which is entirely different from what like an ultra-controlled structural film would be. But it's interesting because it does have the relationship with structuralism when I first conceived of the film. And it's kind of just like moved away from that. Drew?
So like, projects take a lot of work, and I feel like we get too caught up in like how much work everything is that we forget like, oh, actually this is fun. Like, what is the funnest part for you?
The most fun part for me is just like the direct-to-film animation. I have like this room in my house that's supposed to be a dining room, but I have no family, and I'm a college student, and so I can't afford a dinner table. So I just put cardboard all on the floor, and I sit there and I'll put on music and just paint and scratch for hours and destroy my back and my neck. But that's like the most fun part for me, is just like be able to relax and kind of like disappear for a few hours. Anyone else? Tanner?
You said the length of the film will depend on the editing style you use, but how much how many feet of film are you working with?
So the base of the film is 6 minutes long if you project it at 24 frames per second. I think the film will probably end up being 10 to 15 minutes. Any final questions?
Are you going to screen it here when you're finished?
Yeah, I'll screen it here.
Okay.
All right, thank you guys.
All right, so we're going to roll into the screenings unless anyone very much has to go powder their nose. That's a callback to someone who may or may not be watching the stream right now. So what we could do is we could take a 5-minute intermission. For those who are joining us via the live stream, we will be actually screening the films as well. So we will be taking a 5-minute intermission, and then we will resume with the screenings. Yes. All right, so for our virtual audience, thank you for patiently waiting while we were powdering our noses. So what we're going to be doing now, we're going to be doing a screening. Now, I know from what you all can see on the virtual side, do not worry, you will actually see a better version of what you're seeing right now. If for some reason the live stream starts acting a fool, all of the videos are on the playlist that you all should have received a link to as well. We will be doing a Q&A at the end, so if you have questions, please try to remember them for an hour. And then we will have our live stream, and then that will conclude our session. All right, that being said, we will get things rolling.
they wear silly smokes, cause they know I'm the king of the cool jazz. Cool jazz. Cool jazz. We know cats who really do that cool jazz. We know cats who really do that cool jazz. Which cat you talking about? I wonder, could it be me? Cause you know, I'm the coolest cat there ever could be. When you see me walking down the street, all the fellas, 1, 2, 3. On your faces they wear silly smokes, cause they know I'm the king of the cool jazz. Cool jazz.
What is cool? Me, I'm cool. I am a walking, talking deep freeze.
Cool jazz.
Refrigerator, baby.
Cool jazz. 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 Can you dig? 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 Can you cool jazz? Yeah. Cool jazz. Can you dig? 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 Can you cool jazz? Yeah. Cool jazz. When you see me walking down the street, all the fellas, 1, 2, 3. On your faces you wear silly smokes, cause you know I'm the king of the cool jazz. Cool jazz. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Rock and roll machine with perspex bubble dome. Rock and roll a stream with grills of double chrome. Let the music play and watch those disco round. What we wouldn't pay, oh, just to hear that jukebox sound. Sonoramic sound for high fidelity. Let that bass resound, rock all up on me. What you wanna play and push those buttons down. What we wouldn't pay, oh, just to hear that jukebox sound. Those ones were yesterday with songs we used to play. Outdated sounds and ugly too. We know what is right for you. Let's show you what we can do. New mahoganyte with woven tapestry. No more flashing lights or chrome vulgarity. Digital relate and quadraphonic sound. I just hope one day, oh, that we'll hear that jukebox sound. Yeah, yeah, that jukebox sound. Yeah, yeah, that jukebox sound. Yeah, yeah, that jukebox sound.
I like to watch the leaves change. Reds, yellows, and oranges fill the sky, soon to fall to our feet and be swept away, only to grow back more beautiful than before.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Genie. Happy birthday to you.
I've become haunted by liminal spaces, the feeling of a lost soul rising into oblivion, an association with stagnation, though a push to overcome. I've become fascinated with liminal spaces, the thrill of the unknown, the numbness of waiting, the disorientation of transition, a space where my own consciousness is suspended. I watch the leaves change through their liminal spaces. Only change creates movement. I have nightmares about staying in the same place forever. I've worked a 9 to 5 for a month. It feels as if my soul is being ripped out of my chest. I'm surrounded by a lack of fulfillment, a lack of power, a world that is unchanging. To be stagnant is to be weak, a filtration of your own sanity, a robotic containment of your spirit, screaming to escape, though succumbed by inertness. It is easier to be stagnant, a subpar life that never faces the unknown. It's comfortable. Nothing happens when you're comfortable.
Hey, Jamie.
Airports are uncomfortable. The 9 to 5 is my airport, a place of sitting for 12 hours, though a situation only temporary, until I move on to my destination. For my aspiration outweighs any taste of failure. I move to face the unknown, with the utmost possibility of rejection, but in mind the slightest glimpse of ascension. Movement changes everything. At times I am too stubborn to change. It's easy to agree with yourself. It's easy to be comfortable. I sacrifice my satisfaction for the sake of comfort, but liberation only happens when change occurs. I sit in the airport and watch the leaves change. I like to watch the leaves change. Reds, yellows, and oranges fill the sky, soon to fall to our feet and be swept away, only to grow back more beautiful than before.
centuries. People crying and dying, knowing it's coming. Knowing that there is a move of God beyond anything human eyes have ever seen. Knowing it's coming. Prophets have prophesied of it. People have prayed, seeing it in the Spirit. But I'm here to tell you tonight, we are in the first range of a major flood. It has already begun. Amen.
So I don't want to look at this photo album anymore.
So there was this man that I never knew.
He gave you what he wanted you to see.
I can't believe I have not had a heart attack by now,
Who was with
20
me
hours
or
if I weren't born, because it never
all
happened.
the snapshots from every vacation.
But I will try be an asshole.
Then you be an asshole.
He's such a flip a switch
Four
that I
faces
feel
of
like
you.
ugly
Performance.
ugly, four
Ugly
faces,
faces.
and uglier.
A
stroke
It's a nice cocktail.
above
Neurological
bipolar. I can't
problems.
believe
It's
someone
just fine.
would write something like that about their children.
Because that's what
100%
narcissists
never
do.
You don't get he's a liar.
More lies.
You
These
don't
photographs
correct
are
those
all
lies.
people are telling
Lies.
lies.
Tired.
Lies.
To others
Lies
feel
upon
tired.
lies.
My
Lies.
life has
Lies.
been a lie.
You feed into them.
people of their
You make
lies.
them worse. You make people believe we're worse than they even made us out to be.
He could really ashamed of you. Life. Get away with you were a $3 bill. You were my $3 bill. Don't fucking loser. But also away from me that there are no words. Better forget. I don't want to know every picture was a lie. You and every fake smile at a party. Pictures. I can't. There are no words. Lies that each single one of them told. But I also feel nothing.
Jim, you know, this whole thing is, well, it's spooky.
Kind of creepy, isn't it?
It's spooky.
Margie, have you ever tried to fix a fuel pump to a rock and roll beat? Rock and roll beat. Rock and roll beat. Rock and roll beat. Run like the devil. Devil. Run like the devil. Run like the devil. Run like the devil. Devil, devil, devil. Devil.
She asked me if I believe in God. I said no, so then they assumed I worshiped the devil. There is power in being anonymous, being concealed behind the mask, hiding your true identity. She finds the power to overcome adversity, inner fear, the war within. The mask conceals all, the masks of the apocalypse.
Sometimes by externalizing that inner war, we will find ourselves manufacturing false sense of pleasure, seeking out external solutions for we will find ourselves false sense of pleasure, seeking pleasure, we are constantly trying to survive. There is a certain internal subconscious dynamic. The psyche will try and find relief. Sometimes by externalizing that inner war, we will find ourselves manufacturing false sense of pleasure, seeking out external solutions for internal problems.
I've always pretty loudly expressed myself through the way that I dress and decorate my body, and I think that I've gone in and out of phases of like silencing myself and feeling like I was too much or like I needed to be a certain way or look a certain way to be more accepted, but really I think that that just comes from like a lack of self-acceptance. And I've found, I'm 29 years old now, and I've found that like just in the last few years that it doesn't really matter, and as long as I have a strong sense of self-acceptance, then
was one thing, now it's another. It was one thing, now it's another. It was one thing, now it's another. It was one thing, now it's another.
It was one thing, now it's another. It was one thing, now it's another. It was one thing, now it's another. It was one thing, now it's another.
It was one thing, now it's another.
I don't dance anymore. Spent my first 8 years chasing rhythm, but I don't dance anymore. Spent hours and hours practicing solos for church performances, but I don't dance anymore. Battled at school socials, stopped being too cool at parties, and dapped up strangers turned hype men at the club, but I don't dance anymore. My mother calls me Happy Feet, but I don't dance anymore. But maybe
if it's not one thing, then it's another. If it's not one thing, then it's another. If it's not one thing, then it's another. If it's not one thing, then it's another.
If it's not one thing, then it's another. If it's not one thing, then it's another. If it's not one thing, then it's another. If it's not one thing, then it's another.
If it's not one thing, then it's another. If it's not one thing.
why don't I dance anymore? Trayvon doesn't. Oscar doesn't. Eric doesn't. Big Mike doesn't. Sandra doesn't. Elijah doesn't. Tatiana doesn't. Brianna doesn't. George doesn't. Dante doesn't. Adam doesn't. Corey doesn't. Al Tariq doesn't. Rayshard doesn't. James doesn't. Ahmad doesn't. Jamel doesn't. Botham doesn't. Stefan doesn't. Jordan doesn't. Philando doesn't. Alton doesn't. Tamir doesn't. Should I? Stop.
All letters are love letters. I'm making a list poem with the fragments I hear from people's conversations on the streets, but I keep forgetting to write them down. And when I do write them down, they end up in different notebooks, spread out over many years and across the many cities I've lived in. A bus in Seattle, a farmhouse in Iowa, a warehouse in Florida, a rock wall behind the cabin in the North Woods of Maine where your mom and I live. And beneath the shallow roots of grandfather's Miami garden, not the real one, the one I remember. I'll text you when I get out of my yoga class. The bank owns the house. Fixer-uppers are $4.70. That used to be a sanctuary for homeless people. You can't park here. You always ask about the black burnt bark on the pine trees, and we talk about the necessity of fire to burn things back, make room for a new path. You won't remember this, so I'll write it down for you. The inkberry was in bloom. 10 years pass, and I'm looking up at the newly formed leaves on the oak tree. I'm back in Iowa somehow, listening to that same wind. The future was still pregnant with possibilities. Meanwhile, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, terrifying crucifixion statue, skinny Jesus, bloody, sliced up, flesh hanging from the open wounds, head tilted slightly to the right, mouth hanging open, eyes glassy, hands and feet nailed to the black cross. more blood, and beneath the crown of thorns, some very lifelike hair. Odin sees the world end in fire, the rest of his days spent seeking a way to stop it. God never seemed so mortal. My question was, if he hadn't drank from that well and been granted the gift of prophecy, would it ever still come true? The cosmic wolf, the Midgard serpent, and Thor himself slay and become slain. Surth with his flaming sword lays the earth to ruin. An analysis of the pantheon of Icelandic sagas. He empties his pockets and says it's a process of accretion. I must have asked him how he made those strange films, but after all these years I only recall the answer to an unknown question. As these things accumulated in his life, he began taking measure of them. A collage forms in his mind. That was 13 years ago in a bar in Baltimore. I've been formulating an answer to these questions ever since. I drive to town just so I could sleep in the movies. That's where all my best ideas came to me. There are no revelations. There is no devil waiting to trick you. I saw the saw palmetto and the sable palm. I saw the ex-convict at the black girl's house. I saw the stars and bars on the dog leash. I saw a loaded gun in the drawer by the TV. I saw the sugar cane. I saw a well-dressed Haitian outside the feed store. I saw the despondent mom. I saw the men passed out on bar stools. I saw the carnival rides broke down for the winter. I saw a white horse, Spanish cracker with gray speckles standing with his head down, looking suicidal and still as stone in the rain. I saw the Seminole Hotel. I saw the man at the bus stop, his left hand clasped to his left ear. I saw the Jesus Christ Holy Ghost Crusade. This is America today. These glass fragments wash up on shore. A Kwakiutl man explains to me that the colonizers used the ocean for a dumping ground. I hesitated to ask what they use it for now. How many bentwood boxes were burned by the British? How many villages on fire? How many died from the virus that spread up and down the coast? I'll take that trip to Mars I always dreamt about. We bought the El Camino on a Sunday the day after we moved back east. You were still a little girl standing next to me and your grandfather when you whispered in my ear, "I don't like it." He wanted $3,200. I offered $15 and settled on $16. You were in the back seat and I put on the radio, listening to this talk radio host, and within 5 minutes he's assaulting college professors with such vitriol that I get scared and turn it off. It sounds like someone wants to kill me. For some people, the Bible is like some chess game where you try and remember all the moves, and if you play the game long enough, you find yourself inflamed in a compound in Waco, Texas. Saw some of my old comrades. It was so sad, I tell her, how things have changed, everyone's lives falling apart. Young people look old people look close to death, hair falling out. People's lives in ruin while their kids grow into adults and realize all the decisions have already been made. A way of understanding human plant-animal relations through comic book characters. I overhear a woman say to a Cherokee man, "My son wanted to see a real Indian," and he says, "I'm real." Later, there's a field in Iowa next to some woods. Video stores were in their death throes, and you could buy VHS tapes for 10 cents on the dollar. Except for out in the cornfields where everything was many years behind the times. It felt good to travel back in time, like I had some power over the chronos, the long, slow decay of things that brings everything to its simplest, purest state, like sand. I saw a white horse. I saw the prophet. I saw the Withlacoochee. I saw Sumterville. I saw where the sheriff lived. I saw the Mexican selling oranges out of the back of his big black truck. I saw the ripe red kunti seed. There was a large fish on the wall. The reception was in the American Legion on the island where your mom's family settled some time ago. She grew up there in the 80s before the boom. I wore a guayabera the color of sand and she had on a simple white dress. I could tell you stories of all the people whose lives fell into ruin after that day. It wasn't anyone's fault, just the way life unfolds. It's hard to figure out how to make it in this world. He lived in an America that held the illusion of an animated Norman Rockwell painting, working in a factory in Ohio alongside black folks in some alternative history where racism fell out of practice long ago. Her husband was deported and her oldest son died of cancer near Christmas. The pesticides in that town kill people in a quiet kind of way. Nothing is going to stop these things from happening. I think of her a lot, especially around the holidays. It's 10 years later. We're living in the snow in the middle of nowhere, 1,000 miles from anyone. There was a farmhouse, cold, rotting away, forest green, but we both liked it. I had a pompadour. I made a phone call in the rain. There was no shower, but you could take baths in a clawhammer tub. I made a friend, but then I lost him some years later. Your mom gets a letter in the mail from the landlord. Says if we renew the lease for a year, the rent goes up $50. If we renew for 6 months, it goes up $95. I say, what about the option where we tell them to go fuck themselves? She says they don't have that option. Just this past week, an entire continent has been on fire. The American president assassinated a general of a foreign nation, and koala bears have become functionally extinct. You could not make up a world such as this. They say we're headed towards a super drought. Soon, Earth flames consume the land. As if our problems could be solved burying them in the deserts of New Mexico. It was decreed that those who died of the distemper be buried 6 feet deep. They say also to keep a social distance of 6 feet, which invokes death in my mind. Poor bastard hanging on the cross, I think, as I'm idling at the stoplight. The worst horror I can imagine is Jesus Christ being murdered on the cross for no good reason, just an unlucky guy in the wrong place at the wrong time. As I'm putting these notes together, you come and sit on my lap. I remember when you used to sleep on my shoulder, and now I see a version of you where I'm a ghost. It's okay. It's okay. The continent burns to crisps. Odin falls. Surt with his flaming sword fulfills the prophecy. Investor confidence plummets like flaming warplanes. Hiroshima and Nagasaki burn. According to the museum in Los Alamos, only a few thousand died, but so does everyone else. One day the universe splits apart like a withered seed pod, but you and I have a few good laughs before then, like when we fist bump as we ride our bikes through the night, or like today when we walk through Holly's shelter and you asked, what happens if it rains? And I say, we get wet, and you laugh. Everything gets purified, new seeds cast across the fertile universe. You sprout from the ashes of the inkberry. My notes are poems written on burnt pine bark. My notes are tracks in the mud before a rain came. My notes are at the fork in the trail left off the path towards the Pocosin where a stand of Venus flytraps grows undisturbed as they have for some time now. My notes are the seeds of the inkberry in your pocket. Just yesterday morning they let me know you were gone. Suzanne, the plans they made put an end to you. I walked out this morning and I wrote down this song. I just can't remember who to send it to. I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I've seen sunny days that I thought would never end. I've seen lonely times when I could not find a friend, but I always thought I'd see you again. All letters are love letters.
storm the Capitol, to smash windows, to occupy offices, threatening the safety of duly elected officials. It's not protest, it's insurrection.
So what you're witnessing is, I think fair to say, unprecedented. Throngs of protesters turned mob coming and breaching the United States Capitol.
And you can see protesters here, they're just sort of roaming through the hall here. You guys see?
Those who perform these reprehensible acts cannot be called protesters. No. These were rioters and insurrectionists, goons and thugs, domestic terrorists.
Get her down! Get the light! Flashlight!
We didn't expect it to be this way. Together, we hope to take a stand, to scoff in the face of our government's division, where we shake hands with those who differ in opinion. We were looking for unity, but America is buckling under the pressure of something years in the making. We watched as people screamed in each other's faces, mouths uncovered by masks on the brink of outbreak.
Give me 4 more, we smoking to this.
Is this our country's demise? We started with a quest for common ground, but we left suspended in turmoil. Our message of unity collapsing before our eyes. We stuck our cameras up their noses as they circled like moths to light, spitting their views like acidic viral pellets.
The barbarians are at the gate. Do you want a fighter defending that gate, or do you want someone who's going to open the gate to the barbarians?
With only the cameras to listen. The lack of unity. Maybe it wasn't all so bad. After all, we learned something. History would be made, they said. A statement without virtue. We wanted unity, and we got complete chaos. Red versus blue, Democrat versus Republican, lies. Everyone was alone. We were no longer kids with cameras. In our hotel room, we were safe. Nights of nachos and coffee gave us a taste of innocence among the reckoning. If only we could go back to the joy of being kids with cameras. Instead, we walk endlessly through the streets of DC, only to awaken to our new American reality. This country is broken.
I'm scared about the future of this country, and I am hoping that we can have an election where our votes actually get counted.
We wanted to repair what we could not sew together. Is this really the home of the brave? From each side, citizens armed with weapons. We stood helpless, unsure of this shaken nation. Shame on America for using religion as a means to preach division.
That evangelical leaders have stood up and said, I endorse Joe Biden. You've abandoned decency, you've abandoned your calling, and most of all, you have made a deal with the devil that is going to stain you the rest of your life.
For those who live in the White House are false prophets, yet people think they can save us from this wreckage? Bullshit. The only enemy is ourselves. We cannot escape the troubles of our nation, at least 20 mass shootings in 2 weeks, and yet we turn a blind eye. We need change.
And I am so frightened about what has happened to this country. It's like it's been an assault on the wonderful things that we fought for in the 60s. The suppression of the vote is just horrible, what has happened. And I'm here today to encourage people to pray to God above, because we need a powerful being right now to help us, because this country is so divided.
Despite it all, we still have hope for unity. We have to, for the alternative is too bleak. It will take some time, but let us hope that one day we can shake hands with our foes and look each other in the eye. We will extend our hands with no despise. I am here for you, we will say, under this firm nation of red, white, and blue. We must stand together with only white flags.
I came out here because I just thought it was the most important time to be here.
Yeah?
You know, it's the most important election ever.
Absolutely.
It's like I've never been a political or a religious person at all. It's like I just feel like this moment in history matters, you know? And being here and taking pictures and taking videos is very important.
Are you afraid of having a baby, Mary? No, I'm not.
If ever the devil was born without a pair of horns, it was you, Jezebel, it was you. If ever an angel fell, Jezebel, it was you, Jezebel, it was you. If ever a pair of eyes promised paradise, deceiving me, grieving me, leaving me blue, Jezebel, it was you. If ever the devil's plan was made to torment man, it was you, Jezebel, it was you.
If you marry your first cousin, do you have a deformed baby?
Would be better had I never known a lover such as you, forsaking dreams and all for the siren call of your arms. Like a demon, love possessed me, you obsessed me constantly. What evil star is mine that my fate's design should be Jezebel? If ever a pair of eyes promised paradise, deceiving me, grieving me, leaving me blue, Jezebel, it was you. If ever the devil's plan was made to torment man, it was you. Night and day, every way.
Oh, she's okay, but I can do better than her, Kenny. She's going around with Dave anyway. Well, sure I could. I just didn't want to. You should see the one I'm taking tonight.
His interests were mainly masculine, and his success at sports made him sure of himself. He could take girls in his stride, just as he did games.
Okay. All right.
Goodwill. Someone donated
For-
it wasn't here sadly. Otherwise, I would tell you which one.
Could I have
Someone
a?
donated
Where's a glass?
and
I
they
need
were
a
Oh,
all
gavel.
Like texture but different colors. Like,
Hey,
one was
filmmakers,
black, one was
filmmakers,
purple, one was
filmmakers,
blue.
filmmakers,
Filmmakers.
filmmakers. Thank you.
Yo.
All right. My apologies to those joining us in the virtual audience for hearing my rough voice. For those who are still in the virtual audience, thank you for just living through the technical difficulties. I promise we will fix things in post. As well for filmmakers who had their things screened. If there was an issue with any of the screenings, please shoot Anya a message. and we will fix it in post.
Everything that worked, Alexis did.
Yeah, everything that didn't work. And anything that Anya didn't do, Carlos did. So I guess we just start round table. We only have one mic, so I'm gonna pass it along. I guess just rolling out to questions for the filmmakers. If anyone has any questions off the bat, dying? I know I do. All right. So Drew, pass it along. I'm gonna swivel it. So my question to you is, first of all, how dare you? Like, how dare you? You didn't put a jump scare in there, or else I was gonna be like, some hands might have been. It was close.
Yeah.
But how? What was the whole process? The idea, inspiration, all that fun stuff.
This was kind of an idea that I've had for a while, for a few months, but I never knew how to actually do it, and I didn't have any kind of idea. I just knew that if you know me, I'm obsessed with video games. I have been for my whole life, and the atmosphere that can be created through video games, and the sound design and everything. I should really just get into making video games, but that's hard. So I had to just animate a video game that I made up instead. This still took 40 plus hours of editing, so it wasn't hard, but it was, the process was me going to a UNCW nature reserve called E.B. Henwood, that Tristan Turner actually showed me, and I took pictures with my iPhone and then heavily edited them in Premiere to make them look distorted and the goal was to look like old PlayStation 1 graphics, the original Resident Evil and Silent Hill game. Then it just was a matter of figuring out the story, figuring out which there's kind of a story. It's more about thematic elements throughout, and then the music was obviously a big part. That was probably the most fun part because that was where I was the closest to being done. All of the sequencing and all that stuff was kind of awful just because it was really overwhelming. I had so many pictures, I didn't know. Figuring out the structure just took a long time, but overall I'm happy with how it came out, and especially the music and the sound I think I'm really happy with. And the intense moments were something I was worried about too, but figuring out that you can, when you move the camera, when you take a picture with light, it creates a blur effect, so doing that multiple times from different angles kind of created this it looks like his face is kind of like leaving itself or something. So that was a cool thing to experiment with. But yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, looks like people in the chat, hey, I like to see it. We love to see it. Masha says these are amazing. Andre says nice work, everyone. Since Genie is sitting right beside you, Genie, the voice of the evening, that's not mine. How is it with the voiceover? Do you bring, what are you bringing to the table? Like, is there some rituals or some teas going on? How do you get in the zone for doing the voice work, especially on different projects?
Yeah, so I really like to write stuff when I'm really tired, and sometimes I can be like really bad at talking, and so I just write everything down, especially when I'm really sleepy, and I think of my life in like poetry form a lot of the time. So when I'm like feeling an abundance of emotions, I think of it more poetically, and I think of like lines to describe how I'm feeling, and that's kind of how my brain works, in like this poetic flow constantly. And so I write all of that down, and usually it's just like throwing up everything, and I kind of steer what I have to different projects. So the one that I did about movement, the one that I submitted, was a bunch of different pieces I had written, kind of thrown together as one, and I formulated it to make it one. And then for Kiersten, Megan, Tanner, Hugh, and I's project, they all submitted something to me, and then we kind of all worked together to formulate one coherent thing. At first, it was like really awkward to hear my voice, but I've gotten like so used to it now that it doesn't really faze me, and usually I have to record voiceovers multiple times, because I always mess up, or I like burp during the middle of something on accident, or I start laughing, but yeah, that's kind of the flow, I guess.
Awesome. Shannon says rhythm and poetic confessionals are so important to so many of these films. Love it. Dave says great work. I want to go back, kind of going off my original comment to Drew. I want to move over to Kiersten with how dare you clown? Actually, a better question is clown politics question. The duality of the filmmaker.
So that was for the experimental class with Shannon, who was awesome, by the way. The clown project was something that I just kind of came up with, and I've been obsessed with slightly throughout the semester. I don't know why, it's just been a topic of interest. And so I used Jonathan's music. He was nice enough to let me use it and kind of manipulate the speed of the music as well. So I wanted to make somewhat of a music video to it, which it was cropped a bit on the screen. Sorry about that. I don't know if that was my fault or if it was like an export issue or whatever. So okay.
It was Anya's fault.
I'll like link it in our group chat if you guys want to go back and watch it on Vimeo or something, but it's not a big deal. But basically, yeah, I've just been kind of obsessed with that topic recently, and I wanted to develop a character that was a clown that was not very clown-like, that was like doing clown things but not enjoying themselves, if that makes any sense at all. And then for the doc project, that was something that was born last semester. As you guys are well aware, we had class together with George, and I'm glad that we were able to see it through as kind of a time capsule piece. But we do want to expand on that. There's some stuff in the works for maybe future with our documentary class in the fall with George. So hopefully we can add a little bit of like good old North Carolina history to some of that division in politics sort of thing. So.
And speaking of politics, gotta pass it to La-Rel. Just because I think you had 3 projects that you showed, but 2 of them definitely you slid in is probably not the best phrasing. That sounds too negative. In a positive slid in. Involved. There we go. But you incorporated, the Black Lives Matter movement into your work. Can you kind of talk about how that came to, especially like the first piece of your own personal experience and how that movement has shaped how you are as a filmmaker?
Honestly, both of those came organically. It wasn't something that I originally intended to be elements in those projects. Really, the process for both of those was the same. I had another idea that I wanted to try, and I was just hitting roadblocks, and wasn't really feeling motivated and getting those other works done. So I just had to step back and think about what was going on with me personally at this particular moment in time, what things I was passionate about, what things triggered me, and kind of felt, follow those feelings essentially, those ideas, those thoughts that I have to myself or that I have in conversation. So that became the germ that brought those projects to life.
Nice. Going off of what? Yeah, Anya, you have.
I have a question for Meg. I'm really curious about how.
Meg, you gotta take the.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm just so loud. I'm used to not needing one. Go ahead, Anya.
Yeah. So those like bits of conversation and like voiceover. Where did you source those from? Did you script it? Did you record yourself on the phone? Like, what are those?
That is an awesome question. So something happened in the midst of this project that took it in a completely different direction. So I was really like struggle bus. I'm like writing something, nothing was working. I checked out the H6 3 times. Finally, I'm like, Aaron's gonna kill me. I have to record something. So I just started talking, and I did 4 takes, and then I listened back, and I found all these like redundancies and words I was saying, like lie, liar, 4 faces, $3 bill, all these words I kept like plucking out, and I was just moving them on the timeline. I was like, oh, well, I like that word. Then I started listening to them together in layers. I was like, oh my gosh, this works great for what I'm doing, because it's supposed to kind of represent like my brain and how chaotic it is all the time about like a family member. And so it's just, when I played it for my sister, she's like, oh my God, that's exactly how I feel. I was like, good, because that's what I want to convey, is this crazy, crazy chaos. And then at the end, it's like, and sometimes I just don't care. So that was all me, and it was 4 takes. So, yep. There's that. A little too personal, but that's what we do as artists. So.
The effect at the end when you say nothing and it goes silent is very, very powerful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I have a question for Jonathan. Especially because I know Kiersten had mentioned that she used some of your music, and being a musician, how do you approach music the same way you approach filmmaking? How does that work? Do you have different mindsets? How do you weave them together in your projects?
Yeah, so the Shenandoah is actually a part of a series, so it's going to be like an installation, hopefully. And it's, what I'm doing is like, and I did it in Shannon's class as well, I'm interested in visual music, so I'll like invert a scoring process, so I'll have music and then I'll score the music with visuals, so kind of like changing that process. I like doing that a lot. And I guess just editing, rhythmically, in editing, everything is musical to me, so like it has to have like a structure, so there's almost like, and liturgy was in the form of the church service, obviously, but I grew up in the church, that's another story, but yeah, so music is very integral to my work and everything has some type of musical quality to it, even if there isn't music in it. Like it has to, in my head, that's how I see it, almost like a synesthesia in a way. But
there's a hand. Oh, yes, Matthias.
Question. So I'm in love with liturgy because it seems so authentic to the sort of not theatrical church sort of films that sometimes show up in archives and other things. These decrepit sort of lost, half-forgotten things, and visually nail it so closely. But I know you've done it digitally. I want to know how. I'm fascinated because that looks so authentic. I was like, wait.
Yeah, so that was on 16 millimeter. And then it also, I used some other 16 millimeter footage that I have from a previous project, blending it. And then the font was actually meticulously chosen because it's like a Baptist font. And if you're familiar with typeface, that particular, my partner's here and help me with that, but we both are obsessed with typefaces. But anyway, that's like very important to it. So like having that script font is like, there's a Baptist church here that actually one of their signs has a font similar to it on it. So I was like, that's the one. But, yeah. So yeah, it was 16.
My next question is for Pearl. That's right, I'm getting all of you all. I didn't bring you up on stage. Ready?
Shift awkwardly.
So Pearl, my question for you is, I think I'm not in the MFA, so you're gonna have to like correct me on like the assignment stuff, because I think George was talking, and then is the footage from him for like the assignment?
That's actually George's. I'm just the editor for that.
So my question for that is, what's your approach as an editor when the like the raw footage, the raw audio isn't necessarily your like initial creation? So how do you go about as an editor to fulfill the vision of the original filmmaker, but also having your own personal like touch on it?
Yeah, so first of all, I never thought I would be sitting up here talking about something that I hated in undergrad. Here I am. I despise. I was literally not going to do MFA just because of the editing class. I was so afraid of editing. I was like, nope, I'm just going to be editing. I'm going to sit and write all day. If that's what y'all do, I don't know. But so basically what I did is the communication with your director is key. I actually sat down and talked with George and was like, hey, so what is this to you? What would you like to see this? Like, is there a certain, I gave him, I think it was 3 scenes that I said, you can keep, I will keep them regardless of what the finished one is, like 3 that you feel like are integral to this piece, and that's it. And he actually didn't even do that. He's like, I give everything to you, I trust you. But his main thing, what we wanted to do is cut it down. We wanted to cut it to festival length. It was 20 something minutes when I first got it. And he was like, the ideal end goal here is to cut it in half and cut it into about 10-ish minutes. I said, okay, I can work with that. So basically the whole gist of it, it's 1 of 3. So this is the second one in a trilogy that he's making. I believe he's making the 3rd one as we speak. But it's basically how we like kind of worked around this. Yes, it's in a series, but it shouldn't have to be a Marvel movie where half the references you don't understand if you don't see the rest of it. So basically wanted to stand on its own. They're not going to play everything in a festival. They're not going to play the trilogy in a festival. And kind of how we talked about it was, this is sort of a piece for his daughter and I. So she goes back and she looks at it, and it's kind of either nostalgia for him, nostalgia for her, what's going on in the world, the koala bears, the world's on fire. Like some of his views on religion, the occult, that type of deal. And so I just kind of worked it as if my dad were making me a film, like what would I want to see? And I actually ended up losing some of the footage. It just never appeared on the version that he gave me. So actually that's kind of a blessing because I had less to work with. So I just worked with what I had.
But yeah, it just kind of cut it all up. He gave it to me one time on iPad, every single piece of it. And just chopped it up and basically puzzle pieced it back together. And just glued it back up, and there it was. And I'm really happy with it, and I think George is too. So we're really happy with it.
Staying on the same page of editing process, move into Hugh. So Hugh, I do want to ask you about your editing process for your project, for your film, as well as the subject of nature. I think like last semester you had a short film that involved or was influenced by nature, and just the way that it feels kind of like an essay. Do you see yourself moving towards as an essayist filmmaker, or just broad, whoever you want to run with that long ass question?
I'm not sure. So like on that very short film I did, it was like for Shannon Silva's experimental class, and it was like taking photos that everyone had taken and putting that to a sound edit, and Drew did the sound edit that I worked with. So it was a lot of like other people's nature shots, which were very nice. Like I had one shot that was actually mine in the whole thing, and it was of the fan. So I don't know, I just think it's nice to look at, I guess. And I don't know, I don't really have like a good explanation for that film. It's just kind of what I felt would be compelling to go along with the sound. So just kind of doing like, I don't know, contrast, and I was just like playing around with a lot of stuff in Premiere. I was like still learning a lot of things through the process of doing that, so yeah.
You're feeling the vibes. Always on the vibes.
Very calming.
And the last question, unless our audience has questions, No, I was going. I just wanted.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't want to say
I'm
last.
stepping out.
I didn't want to say last
forget,
question.
I know you have not
and then
forgotten.
someone puts their hand up, and I'm like, JK, not last question.
I actually thought about that a couple minutes ago.
We totally planned it.
Yeah.
All right,
Absolutely
so
intentional.
last question, certainly not the least question, goes to Cece. See what I did
Somewhat.
there? Move it back towards me. You see what I did there? So Cece, my question for you with your project is, it was just wild. So like, what was?
Thank you.
Yeah, what was just the thought
I have a
process?
question. Is it inspired by like things in the similar tradition of Metropolis?
So that may be a little bit more of what inspired it was encountering some of the films of Martin Arnold and certain filmmakers who like took like public domain movies and like just absolutely trashed them or like did all kinds of things with them. And one of my quarantine watches was this public domain movie about the US about a private guy hiring gangsters to kill Hitler. It was one of the more bizarre things I watched over quarantine. But I decided I wanted to take a boring movie with an interesting premise and like distill it to like, you know, when you get like a lemonade and they haven't mixed it properly and there's just this pure syrup at the bottom. I wanted to basically distill the whole thing to just that pure syrup at the bottom. The movie is an hour. I sped it by like, I got it down to 10 minutes. By speeding it, I tripled the speed. I cut all the fade transitions. So it is now just cut. All the fade transitions are gone. I took 4 songs by a group I recently discovered called the Rosillos from like the 70s or 80s, and just put them back to back to back, and I didn't even let them fade. I just put like that record scratch sound, And then any scenes that were like kind of lagging a little bit, I would like trim them down quite substantially. And then at the end, because I felt like when the movie has been at like a 10 the whole time, the only way to climax it is at like an 11, so that's when I added the public domain footage of the nuclear test sites. But the whole idea was to create this sustained adrenaline concentrate like energy for like 9 to 10 minutes from like an hour-long movie, like it's pure concentrate. You're looking at the place it came from, like why I decided to do it. You're looking at how do I put this? Like a weird like diary from like my brain late 2020 is how I would put it. Like this is kind of where my brain energy was at that point. So I'm just like, I need a time capsule type thing. But yes, that is where that came from.
Nice. All right, last call for questions. Our filmmakers, you all have questions for anyone else that you're sitting by? Oh, I love this song. Yeah. All right, so that concludes our first MA MFA end of semester screening and presentation. I want to take, this is less so for the people that are in-house and more for the virtual people that are still with us. So shout out to the people who are still here. I can't tell, it won't show me. But I do want to shout out Anya, Megan, who left to get some food with your dog, Kiersten, La-Rel, the execs from the GSA for organizing this in a short time frame, so it's a little janky. Yeah, it's okay, we worked on it. I want to thank Mariana and the department for giving us the resources to be able to do this. Wanting to thank all of the people who submitted, filmmakers as well as presenters. We would not have anything if it wasn't for you all. Thank you for making it so I didn't have to hunt people down to submit things. For those,
we had a plan B.
We did. Again, I want to thank you all. I have been your MC, Alexis. For those who are still in the virtual, for joining us in person for the after party, I will see you at 6 p.m. That concludes our time. Now you can all chat to each other. You can go somewhere. I don't know where, but it ain't gonna be here. And that's how I end this.
Can I borrow the microphone?
Oh, yeah.
That building, right? I just want to say something about Tanner screening.
Yes, we have